about intelligence and national security issues. Mr. Hersh is with us this week to talk about his article in the latest edition of the magazine that talks about links between Pakistan and North Korea. Good morning.
Good morning.
This is based on a CIA document delivered to the administration that you say the most politically sensitive information about Pakistan was about Pakistan, which you say the CIA is reporting has been sharing nuclear warhead technology with the regime in North Korea since 1997.
Right. And that's, of course, my opinion, the most politically sensitive stuff. The document doesn't say that, but clearly it says two things. It says North Korea has been cheating big time. This is something that was given to the White House in June it's called a National Intelligence Estimate, or NIE. It's sort of a compilation of, it's not some rah-rah documents, it's a serious, sober assessment. You know, the people in the CIA talk to the people, intelligence people in the Department of Energy, in the Pentagon, other agencies, and they pull together a summary, an estimate. And it told the president, it was highly classified, top secret and all that stuff, SCI for Special Compartmented Intelligence, and not distributed very widely inside the government. Much less, distributed to a lesser degree than other similar documents, and I don't know why, but, and it just said that North Korea has been cheating, as I said, and it also said the problem with that is that their big benefactor has been our best buddy in the war against terrorism, which is the Pakistanis. So naturally, everybody went gulp.
There are three elements to this story: Pakistan and its motives, North Korea and its capabilities, and also the administration and what it did with this information. So let's spend a little time with each. First of all, on Pakistan, which is the most surprising part of this report. What would Pakistan's motives be?
You want to know something? I think it was sheer cash, moolah. They had been buying missiles for a dozen years from North Korea. We knew about that. We didn't like it. We always complained, but they were buying missiles because they wanted to match the threat from India, their great enemy, which was advanced on missile technology. And North Koreans, the leader of North Korea is, in his own way, he diverts a lot of money to the military. I think more than 40% of the population is in the army or on their arms, and they're very good technically. This is a country that can't feed its people, but it does make great missiles. And so Pakistan has naturally been doing a lot of business with them. And in 96, 97, the economy in Pakistan went south. And they had no cash, no reserves at all to pay any foreign debts. And so they bought more missiles from the North Koreans and told them, guess what, fellas, we can't pay you in money, we'll pay you in kind. And the best guess we have is that the North Koreans confronted with the, you know, if Pakistan's economy was in the bad, North Korea's was in the sewer. But rather than get nothing, they took what the Pacs offered them, which was, according to the estimate, let's see, technology and how to make weapons a different way. We knew there had been a big fight with North Korea in the early 90s, and the Clinton administration had almost gone to the brink with them about the fact that they were secretly diverting plutonium, so we thought, from nuclear reactors, which is one way. Plutonium is a byproduct of any reactor. You can generate it, you can make weapons-grade material very easily out of it. We stopped that in '94. At least we cut back on their programs. But in '97, the Pakistanis, in return for missiles, gave them technology on a second method of making fissile material, enriched uranium. And the Pacs had done a great job. They were indigenously capable of making nukes. They gave the North Koreans prototypes of very sophisticated centrifuge. Centrifuge are machines that spin millions of revolutions a second. I have no idea, nanosecond or what. It's very technical. And it took the Pacs about a dozen years to get their program straight. And they passed that technology on to the North Koreans. It's a very, and if North Korea had wanted to go the centrifuge way of making a warhead, it would have taken them a dozen years. With this kind of technology, it cut it in half or maybe even more. It's a huge thing to do in terms of spreading, proliferating weapons. Secondly, they gave them all of their test results. The Pacs had done tests, and they gave them warhead information, how to fabricate a warhead. And they also gave them the data they did from cold tests, which are tests that are practice tests of a warhead, not with uranium, with natural uranium. It's very important in the process. So they basically laid it out for these guys in '97 and '98. And that's, you know, unbelievable. The biggest fear of the arms control industry is the idea of a third world country, in this case a Muslim country with, you know, the Islamic bomb, indigenously capable of making weapons, and that means they don't need us, they don't need the Brits, they don't need the Chinese, they can do it themselves, and then beginning to pass it on. And so when this estimate came in, and the cooperation went along, even after 9/11, even after Mr. Musharraf, the president of Pakistan, swore feasance to us. So you can see, and here they are, there's a bunch of guys that have Iraq on the brain. They very much want Iraq. Here comes this other problem. And one of the real points, and you're absolutely right, of the story, is that the Bush administration did nothing with this for 4 months. And then the story that came out was that an Assistant Secretary of State named Kelly goes to North Korea for a meeting, outlines what we know about it, and the PAC's done us by admitting it or confessing. It's awfully hard to confess about something that we knew already, you know, so the question should be, why did it take them 4 months to deal with this problem? This is, you know, things leak for a reason. Classified things leak for a reason, and not because people are malicious. They leak because secrets that are being kept shouldn't be kept. And there were a lot of people in the government who thought the mishandling of this document and this information was so egregious that when I began to poke around, people didn't shut the door as much as you might think they would.
And you talked to sources who had theories on why the administration didn't deal with it. Would you explain what some of you learned?
Well, the basic theory is that, of course, one of them obviously is Pakistan is our great ally in the war, and it's embarrassing. We don't know what to do. We do know Colin Powell went privately and announced a few weeks after the alleged confession in October, when this whole thing began to unravel and the president was confronted with two crises on nuclear weapons in Iraq and in North Korea. Powell went and talked to Musharraf and announced that he was in Mexico City at some international conference in November, and he told the press then that Musharraf has said no such things are going on now, and I accept this. We basically took what they said at face value. I'm sure in private there were a lot of words said. You know, Pakistan's a country with 20 to 40 warheads and possibly more. It's a very efficient. They can deliver by jet plane. They can deliver by missile. I'd like to think we know where everything is, but people in the government tell me we're no longer sure. We were a year ago, after 9/11. They were pretty helpful. So, you know, what really is more important is the question you might ask. The threat posed by Saddam Hussein, who doesn't have much now. I don't think we're going to find a secret nuclear arsenal. And in fact, it's very unlikely. Or North Korea, which certainly has a capability. And by the way, in the NIE, nobody knows. The NIE being? The CIA document that was given to the President, the National Intelligence Estimate, nobody's saying we know very much about the North. We just don't.
I want to open up our phone lines for your questions for Cy Hersh. He's with us until 8:30 Eastern Time, about 35 minutes from now. And we welcome your calls, comments, or questions on some of the issues raised in his piece this week. Let's begin, because we've got callers already waiting for you, with a call from Massapequa, New York. You're on the air.
Morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Fine, sir.
I like when he says that Pakistani's a great ally of ours. I remember we had a little bit of trouble with these people in India setting off nuclear bombs. And I like to bring forward, too, that most of the technology that China has, we gave to them. And, you know, this act with the CIA, this has been running all the way back to Philip Jessup and Owen Lattimore. If you happen to know who they are, most people have a memory of about 5 minutes, so they may not even know who Philip Jessup and Owen Lattimore are. These are the boys responsible for backing Mao instead of Chiang Kai-shek. We enslaved 600 million people into the communist empire. If you don't believe what I'm saying, get a copy of the UN Charter, read it, compare it to the Soviet Constitution. They're the same exact document, basically.
Thank you, sir. Let's Mr. Hersh answer. Lots to work with, really, in that. First one has comments on Pakistan.
Well, there's no question that we've been having a hard time with Pakistan. Pakistan was our ally in the war against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, and for that the Americans were very grateful. And the whole nuclear history is fascinating because the Pacs developed their first warhead in 1987, and in those days we had Pakistan wired. And there was tremendous fighting inside the administration about what to do about it. And the answer was we took a dive, sort of the same dive you could argue we're taking a little bit right now. and we didn't confront them about what they were doing because we needed them for the war against the Russians. And also, of course, their intelligence service, the ISI, was supporting our intelligence service with the Mujahideen. So here we had virtually, literally, Osama bin Laden and others working on our behalf against the Russians in terms of proselytizing and mobilizing the Muslim community in that part of the world to fight against the Russians in Afghanistan. Sort of bit us. And so it's always been tenuous. I had somebody I know well who's very sophisticated about Pakistan said to me, the trouble with you guys is you come in, and the Americans that is, and you say to the Musharraf regime, there's 2 or 3 guys at the top of the ISI, the intelligence service, that are too close to the Muslim fundamentalists, and the Musharraf gets rid of them, and you're very happy. You think he's great, but it's what you don't know about the numbers 5 to number 40 that are the real problems that you just don't know about. About China, all I can say is China there's no question that the Mao regime put away a lot of people, just like Stalin, and there's no question. But on this case, China is actually helping us in terms of trying to control North Korea. And I think between China, South Korea, and Japan, we've got a lot of allies there to stabilize or try to stabilize that regime.
Next call's from Philadelphia, Democrats line.
Hello.
Good morning, sir.
Yes, a 3-part question. Pakistan is a Muslim country. Do you think that sooner or later, well, the government over there is tenuous at best, do you think that sooner or later, when the government changes over there and we get some more radicals over there, that they will proliferate their weapons through other Muslim countries? And the second part is about North Korea. I don't think we'll ever go into North Korea, because I remember in 1951, when our units reached the Yalu River, and it was frozen over with 18 inches of ice. You could drive trucks over there. A friend of mine was there. And he said the Chinese soldiers, when they crossed the Yalu, they were like locusts coming down. And he was never so panicky in all his life. And they backed away. And we have been forewarned by China not to go that far. And do you think the same thing may happen? Now, the only thing I think we can do with the North Korea is economic. With the trade with China, push China. You know, China sends us 100 ships a day come in here from China, and their goods, and we're the biggest trading partner we have. You think that's the only thing we can do? Thank you very much.
Thanks. Before you respond to his first question, which presumes that there might be problems if there is a regime change, administration change in Pakistan, let me read something to our audience from your article. There is an awful lot of al-Qaeda sympathy within Pakistan's nuclear program, an intelligence official told me. One American non-proliferation expert said, quote, right now, the most dangerous country in the world is Pakistan. If we're incinerated next week, it will be because of HEU, highly enriched uranium, that was given to al-Qaeda by Pakistan.
Well, your question is very prescient, because the real issue, of course, is this is a country with people inside the Pakistani Atomic Energy Committee, a man named A.Q. Khan, among others, who are pretty much, we think, dedicated fundamentalists, who, Mr. Khan, for example, made 13 secret trips to North Korea. We were monitoring him for years. He's been very involved in spreading the news. He's been to Iran. He's been to other countries in the Middle East. And so you have this horrible prospect of people inside Pakistan, allegedly with no connection to the leadership, proselytizing the spread of weapons and making the case that it's not as hard as you think. And there is information. I'm actually doing something on it right now. There is some information suggesting that the Paks have been active in other parts of the Muslim world, which is very scary, if true. Musharraf, as your caller said, is very marginal. I'm sure he looks under his bed every night, not literally, but you know, he's got problems, and it's a very tenuous regime, and it is scary. In terms of fighting North Korea, going to war, I think I quote in the piece, when the Clinton administration looked at it, and one thing that's sort of fascinating must be for the Bush administration, the big word in the Bush administration in the first year of their after taking the presidency in 2001 was ABC, anything but Clinton. And so their initial policy was to do anything differently than the Clinton administration did. Now they find themselves in the same position as Clinton was in '94. This is a guy who's breaking an agreement. and they're going to give him toys. They're going to give him whatever he wants to get away from him. It turns out there's something, the border, the demilitarized zone between North and South is 37 or something like that miles, fewer than 40 miles from Seoul, the main capital of South Korea. And there's something like 10,700 guns capable of firing shells, 500,000 an hour into Seoul. And so I quote the former commanding general of American forces there, an Army general named Gary Locke, a wonderful four-star, retired four-star, now lives in Virginia. He told the senator once, they said, "Can we win a war?" And he said, "Yes, sir, but not right away. You know, 3 hours is 1.5 missiles in downtown Seoul or near downtown Seoul. So it's just very tough."
Also in that section of the article, Mr. Hersh reports that North Korea is one of the most militarized nations in the world, with 45% of its population under arms right now. Next telephone call on this topic is from Kennesaw, Georgia. Good morning.
Hi, how are we doing this morning?
Fine, sir.
All right, thanks. My question for Mr. Hersh is, what is something that he said earlier that he hit it right on the head. He said that America or Europe is losing their grasp on this nuclear situation. It's like the economics. We're losing the economics also. That's what the thing with Iraq is all about. America, Europe, there's a divide here now. They're no longer together. They're dividing each other up. And all this nukes, and it's like some racket that you lose control over, and then the next thing you know, someone else is on the racket, and they don't need us anymore. And that's what this is about. I just want to know your comment on that, sir.
You're in the mainstream of Democratic thought today in this town, I'll tell you that, with that comment.
Gainesville, Virginia, good morning.
Yes, my husband is retired military, and we were stationed in South Korea in 93 to 95 during this time when we were just hours, I think, away from a war. And I know for a fact that if we do go to war with, in fact, we were under General Luck at that time and know him well, and I do know that if we do go to war with North Korea, there will be thousands of American dependents that are over there in Seoul that could possibly be killed or injured. And when we were so close to going to war back in 93 and 94, we have a program, or we had a way of getting the dependents out before things would begin happening, but it didn't happen that way. We were hours within hours of going into conflict, and we had not started the first evacuation. So it is a tremendously dangerous situation for Americans who are over there serving with their husbands and wives in capacities as dependents. Now, the other point is I keep hearing that why don't we worry about North Korea instead of going to Iraq? And you've just been talking about how Pakistan now has all of these wonderful capabilities with nuclear weapons. Why do we want to let Iraq gain that same capability? Why do we want to take that chance when we know that there would be a great risk of them using it against us? Why not do it now, which is what we probably wish we'd have done with Pakistan and maybe some of the other countries now that are nuclear powers? I think that reasoning people have to take this into consideration before criticizing the Bush administration for trying to deal with the problem before it happens instead of after it happens.
Thanks for the call. To the first question on the vulnerability of the U.S. population, how large is it right now?
In South Korea?
On the South Korean border?
I have no idea. I know that one of the estimates that I read about in researching this article estimated that we'd need, if we had a war, we'd have to bring 400,000 troops there, and the casualties, the American casualties, would be between 80 and 100,000. This was the worst case estimate given to Congress in '94 by the former Secretary of Defense Bill Perry and General Luck, and that the overall casualties would be upwards of 1 million. That's including South, North Koreans and Americans, and the cost would be in the trillions. So And the second part of her question, that this is a model because we didn't do it in Pakistan or North Korea, we should be doing it in Iraq. And obviously I'm somebody who's not terribly sympathetic to the idea of going into Iraq, so I'll say what I said with that obvious point, and that is that is that really what we want to be doing now? I mean, let's say we do Iraq, then we have to go and do North Korea, and then we have to do Pakistan. I mean, are we going to be in the position of having to be the nuclear policeman of the world, or are we going to have to work with the world that exists? And in this case, the UN, and even NATO forces, and do what we can to monitor these countries that are cheating. And I think the more prudent thing to do, and nobody is suggesting, and by the way, there is no hard evidence anymore that Saddam is anywhere near being a nuclear power, and the cost of going nuclear is in the billions, and he simply doesn't have it. He's watched too carefully. But you know, that's an argument. She is making an argument that is one of the arguments being made by the administration that the people of the United States will have to judge.
I'd like to have an item from this morning's newspaper on North Korea for you to comment upon, because in your piece, with the Kelly mission, you talk about who is really the strongest voice on setting the policy within the administration. This is J. Solomon John Larkin's piece. Undersecretary of State John Bolton also set rigid terms for the provision of financial assistance to North Korea, undercutting earlier administration statements that seemed to soften U.S. policy toward Pyongyang. He said the U.S. would talk with Pyongyang about steps it must take to meet its international commitments, but would offer no new inducements. Quote, "We will not negotiate with them in a way that rewards bad behavior," said Mr. Bolton. "We will not succumb to blackmail."
Well, there you are. I mean, that's the administration yings and yangs on that issue. And the fact is, in the Kelly mission, the fact is that the North Koreans were prepared to negotiate a lot of issues. They were prepared even before Kelly. Mr. Bolton had spoken out this summer about the North Korean threat, which wasn't paid much attention to. He'd actually literally described sort of what was in the NIE in a speech this summer. And the North Koreans in late August, I think August 30th, responded with a question saying everything's on the table. And I think we ignored it. There was a sense, I think the administration is taking its cue from the personal dislike the president has of Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, who's a wacko guy. And Bush doesn't like him at all. He said a lot of things. I think he calls him pygmy very early, but other things. And has publicly made his dislike of the man, acute dislike of the man. And so playing off that, many people in the administration, Bolton is one of the sort of the neocons, the hardliners in the administration, although he's in the State Department, sort of rammed down Colin Powell's throat by the White House. The North Koreans did express an interest in negotiating a lot of issues. When Kelly came there, at that famous meeting where they allegedly confessed, Kelly's brief was very limited. He told them what he had to say, and he wasn't prepared to negotiate anything. And the American position then was, we're not going to talk about anything until you knock off all the HEU stuff, all the enrichment stuff you're doing, and make it clear that you've stopped it. And so there we are. We're making a demand that probably won't be met. I guess the answer is going to have to be that the president or somebody very high is going to have to go talk to these people. And unless we're going to, and is it going to be blackmail? You can call it anything you want. I'm surprised at Bolton's words, because the administration's been sort of downpedaling it. And it's the old fight in the administration between the hardliners and the people that are more centrist, like Colin Powell.
Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. You're next for Cy Hersh.
Yes, I just wanted to comment on the overall situation in the Middle East as far as the war goes and everything. I hear a lot of anti-Bush sentiment lately. I'm not a Bush supporter per se, but because past policies have led to the problems that are here and now. But the problems are here and now, and we cannot ignore the fact that even though UN inspectors are in there doing their inspections, Saddam Hussein gets on networks like Al Jazeera while the inspections are going on and says, "Death to the Westerners, death to the infidels." He's been lobbing bombs at our troops, and he's using the passive nature of the UN, okay, to further play the game, so to speak, to keep us out as much as possible and to turn our own media against us, against our war effort. This is a dangerous man who has never showed in the time that he's been in power that he has any human rights policies behind him. Okay? So he has to be dealt with. There's no question about it. He's a very dangerous man. He has met with al-Qaeda representatives, too. As far as Pakistan goes, they might have been our allies in the past, but that was for, maybe personal reasons in the region. But you see how fast they changed the tune when we ask them for help. I don't trust them either. As far as North Korea goes, there's another country, okay, another country that has shown absolutely nothing but inhumane behavior, okay, and they're a danger. We have to go after them next. There's no question about it.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate the call. Mr. Hersh?
He's entitled to his opinion. Saddam Hussein, I will just take one element. There's so many you could talk about. I don't think the case has been made for many of the American people. I don't think the press necessarily is leading the charge on this. I think we're following the charge, and I think it's very clear that a lot of people in the United States disagree with you, sir, to think that the case hasn't been made. Nobody likes Saddam Hussein. That isn't the issue. But I'll give you the case certainly about his ties to al-Qaeda are very thin. If the administration has a case, they should be making it. They're not. And I'll give you an example of where some of the history is sort of fascinating. Iraq, Saddam Hussein is one of the few countries that have supported India in its war against Pakistan over Kashmir. In other words, you think that if Saddam Hussein were really in league with al-Qaeda, al-Qaeda is very much behind the liberation of Kashmir, which is the great issue between India and Pakistan, this area between the two that they both claim. And Saddam Hussein has basically supported India's role. And India is, if anything, much more pro-Western, close to America, much closer to America than it has been, close to the Israelis. So it's awfully hard to get a read. This doesn't suggest, and here's one of the problems people, I think, have, would be there be regime change tomorrow. But what do you do with somebody like that? I mean, can you really go to war with everybody, as this man suggests? Are we really capable of doing that and sustaining ourselves and not ruining our country financially and dividing the country bitterly? And is our national security at stake with in terms of anything that happens in Iraq? These are the serious questions that we have. And the case that the fate of America depends on getting rid of Saddam Hussein has not been made in an effective way by this White House. And no other way to shake it out. It just hasn't.
The caller's comments about Pakistan, he said they're not an ally, but in fact the U.S. official position is that they are. With the context of two stories today, and maybe you can give us a better understanding of what the situation is like in Pakistan. First, the Wall Street Journal today, major story about the investigation of Daniel Pearl's murder, which relies on a great deal of information that was gathered by Pakistani police authorities. I'll add to that, a story just was handed to me from today's, from the Wire, saying 4 suspected Islamic militants have been arrested in Pakistan. Authorities say they arrested the alleged members of an outlawed group in a pre-dawn raid. Pakistani police say they're part of a cell waging war on Westerners and Christians. Pakistani security agencies, The Wire says, work closely with the FBI, but officials said today's raid did not involve any foreign intelligence. So there we have 2 cases where they've been cooperating. And
you could almost argue that it seems like every time there's some pressure on them, they bust somebody. I mean, that's the cynical argument. And Musharraf comes to the United States. As you may know, he came back when Pearl was killed. He came here knowing full well that he was dead and didn't tell us. He was here for a week last year, visiting the president at a high-level state meeting. And after he came back, it turned out he'd known the whole time that Pearl was dead, that they had the videotape that had not been made public. So he plays it every way. It seems as every time there's some moment of tension, and there's a lot of tension, particularly about the allegations I raised, particularly in South Asia about this stuff. Of course, the Indians love this story. He seems to come up with another bust, which is I don't want to overdo this because it's hard to be a conspiracy theorist, but it seems clear that Pakistan is hydra-headed on this issue. That on one hand, they will arrest people. Ben al-Shabib, the fellow who's now in our custody, remember the highest ranking person was busted by them right after he came here and got $300 million in a grant from the administration. There does seem to be a pattern that he keeps us on the hook. And clearly, The Indians are screaming. The Indians are almost at the edge. I will tell you, it's sort of an ignored story. They're increasingly angry about the continued infiltration of what they call Al-Qaeda, former Al-Qaeda leaders, into Kashmir, the much disputed Kashmir. And I'll also tell you that things are not great in Afghanistan, which I'm not telling you about. What we call the Taliban are filtering back into the country. There's no question Taliban are coming back. The drug problem there is horrific. In other words, they're back making heroin and selling it around the world. The Russians have gone crazy with us on that issue. So in a lot of ways, the great war on terrorism, as effective as it has been, has downsides to it that are very acute, that don't get paid attention to very much.
Broad question for you. You've described so many powder kegs around the globe. What are the scenarios that you see as a potential, and what are you learning, that kind of tools that the West really has to keep some of these from a conflagration?
Well, you know, you have to take a bigger picture. One of the things that really interests me is I keep on thinking again that we must rethink 9/11. Well, we have made 9/11 into a totally traumatic moment, a sort of dividing point for America. You're either with us or against us. And, you know, I'm not diminishing what happened. It was horrible. But more young, you know, teenage black Americans are killed every year, 3,000 that were, you know, by gunshot that were killed and were killed in 9/11. It just could be that the threat to us may not be as horrific as we think. We're a very powerful country. We can live with terrorism. I'm being heretical in saying this in a funny way. It could be that we are stronger than we think, and the bad guys aren't here in deep ways, in cells living here waiting to strike, you know, sort of like we've got to smoke out the snakes, our president said. It could be that we're in better shape than we think, and we don't have to maul the Muslim community quite as much as we do in America. I assure you that first generations coming to this country are far more loyal than any other group. My parents are immigrants. First generation, they love America. Look at the chances, look at this country. And I think Muslims families coming here and immigrating here and raising their children here are as loyal as anybody. And the idea of them standing in lines and being imprisoned for trying to get their immigration status is very offensive. And so I think we have to maybe take a deep breath and say we're not in this big panic situation. Yes, we have to be vigilant. Yes, we've done amazing work in the United States with the foreign intelligence services. Eritrea, Yemen, Somalia, Libya are all helping us find radicals, the crazies. They're not even religious. I think they're beyond that. There's no reason for us to make war on fundamental Muslims because they have every reason to dislike Osama bin Laden as you and I do. So I think at some point we're going to have to sort of ratchet back where we are in terms of all this fear talk. And I'm not precluding the possibility of some guy in a cab blowing up something tomorrow. That can happen. But the idea that we're as vulnerable as we think we are, and this is, you know, it's good politics for this administration to play it that way. I mean, it plays. Fear is wonderful. It's very good. And I think there is some sense that the more fear, the better. And so we have to really sort of, that's the big picture. In terms of powder kegs, this administration thinks talking tough wins. And I think underneath it all, they think if they can go into Iraq and beat the brains out of Saddam Hussein, which we certainly can, Iraq is not North Korea, that the world will listen, that it'll improve our situation against people like the leadership of North Korea and other places that want to be hostile to us. They think the muscle will work. And there's just, you know, thousands of years of history that suggest otherwise.
Katona, New York. Good morning.
Good morning. A comment on a couple of things that Mr. Hersh said and some questions. One, I think with regard to Pakistan and its orientation in this war, I think the line from that famous movie, Round Up the Usual Suspects, is certainly appropriate. Secondly, I think you'll just your current ramble, which I was listening to, I think you should read the transcript. And I don't think, in a lot of cases, it's an opinion. You don't have a lot much to go on except a personal belief. But I would say to you, read the transcript and see if you really stand behind what you really just said. The questions. With regard to Pakistan, I'd like your comment on the fact that over the years, and this program has been tremendously expensive for Pakistan. I mean, building centrifuges to make this material is not cheap. They had to buy the equipment on a gray market. They didn't make it in Pakistan. Cost billions of dollars. And there's been, you know, kind of information over the years that Saudi Arabia was supporting this program. Any comments on that? Second question in regard to North Korea. getting the centrifuge technology, and as you indicated, 97, 98, it would take a long time. It's not going to take North Korea 2 to 3 years to build a centrifuge facility. This is not a simple facility to build, even if you have the plans. And I can't believe that they are ready to make high-enriched uranium at the present time. And in fact, they're talking about restarting the plutonium reactors in a couple of weeks. Now, they're focusing on the fact that these are making electricity, but we know the particular reactor design is a plutonium producer. It's a plutonium production reactor, which has electricity as a byproduct. Now, in 94, what the Clinton administration did was tell North Korea, shut down these reactors, and we will, South Korea, Japan, and the U.S. will supply you with light water reactor technology. Now, we haven't done that. We have not supplied them with that technology. There have been a lot of problems, primarily in financing and how to exactly do it. So we've been shipping them oil. There's been a lot of talk about this is, American technology producing this plutonium. This is not. This is basically Russian-type technology or Chinese, which is primarily geared to produce plutonium for weapons.
All right, I'm going to jump in there. Thanks.
He knows what he's talking about, obviously. We don't know, in terms of centrifuges and enriched, it took the Pakistanis 12 years, roughly. They stole a lot of stuff from Europe, a company called Uremco. And certainly, no magic wand can come. The best thing you can say, the best guess you have, is that the Pakistanis enabled the North Koreans, if they choose to start enriching uranium, and that would involve building a facility. They do everything underground with as many as 1,500 to 3,000 of these machines going at the same time, developing a cascade, enriching constantly. And it involves a lot of other chemical processes too, very complicated. And we don't know if they've done that. We don't think they've done that. He's absolutely right. We think the best guess would be 2005. In the article I wrote, I probably, in retrospect, I said that they are known to have enriched substantial quantities of uranium as of by 2001. My guess is I would scale that back and said known to have the capability to. They probably did do some experiments, probably did practice what they have, prototypes, but the whole-scale production of enriched materials to enough to get weapons grade, enough material to build bombs, they're years away from that. But we don't know what they have. We don't know whether they have just a small little running cell of centrifuges or we have a lot more. I'll read the transcript, by the way. I stand by what I said in the broad point, that there's another way of looking at all of this. And the other question was...
on the Saudis' support of Pakistan.
Well, there's no question the Saudi support is enormous of Pakistan, my God. But whether or not the money was earmarked for it, certainly it was diverted into it, because to build what they did, the Pakistanis took hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, and the Saudis are just the Saudis. They just have enough money to do what they want.
Glenview, Illinois.
Good morning. I have a comment that I was hoping you could respond to. It seems to me that, back during the Cold War, it was accepted all across the country and politically that the vast majority of people accepted that mutually assured destruction meant that the reason that the way we were going to prevent a nuclear attack was that should we be attacked, we would respond. And although there's always a concern for innocent civilians, we clearly understood that should we have to respond in kind, the vast majority of people who would be dead, killed, maimed, horrible damage, would be innocent civilians. And we accepted that as the means of preventing nuclear war. And it seems to me that in the situation we're in, we're not even necessarily in the next year, but 5 years, 10 years, the most dangerous threat to us is the proliferation of nuclear weapons. How, with organizations like Al-Qaeda, it only takes one, even if it's a small one, to blow up a huge portion of L.A. or Chicago or New York. How, in the same mode, do you prevent it? You can't forever rely just on intelligence and diplomacy to keep stopping every single one. Eventually it will get through unless you have some equivalent mechanism of fear, if you will, which says, should we be attacked? Should this happen? And we know it's, say, from Al-Qaeda, which isn't a country. The countries that support them need to understand, and we need to publicize, and it needs to be accepted here, because if it's not, eventually we'll be attacked. I believe it needs to be accepted that we will, and they know that we will respond in kind to countries that have supported them or are currently at that time supporting Al-Qaeda, that we will respond in the same way we would have responded to Russia.
Thank you. I need to let you go because our time's running out. It's a new version of mutually assured destruction.
Well, he's got to the real gut issue. You know, suppose some, let's assume in Pakistan there are groups doing things that the government doesn't know, and they enable Al-Qaeda, as the person I quoted in the article said, they deliver enriched uranium to Al-Qaeda in a way that they can use it, which is not such an easy task. But there are a lot of people running around who know how to do it out of Russia and out of Pakistan too, scientists who have some skill who can be hired. And suppose they set off a weapon, who do we respond to? Do we destroy Pakistan in response, even though there may not be any clear evidence that the government was responsible? And so it's sort of the horror, really the future horror, and all of which means that how do you deal with it? Do you tell every country we're going to beat you up if you cross the line? Do we go to war with after Iraq? Do we North Korea, or do we do other things? The other option being, do we ameliorate some of the conditions in the world that creates this sort of fundamentalism? Do we improve conditions throughout the Middle East, where there's a lot of despots, including in Saudi Arabia? The leadership isn't very, nothing trickles down. The money is kept at the height. Do we do something about the Israeli issue, the Palestinian issue, which this administration has been woefully deficient about dealing with? And I would argue that we must start doing those things because otherwise we will be in a situation, since turns out our nuclear weapons don't have a hell of a lot of defense, don't offer much to a fanatical person who doesn't want to die, doesn't mind dying, as we saw in 9/11. And so all the bombs and all the defenses we have are useless. We have to really rethink our whole situation. And so far, what we do show is we're flexing a lot of muscles. And in the long run, I don't know if that's going to be enough.
We're going to try to squeeze in two last questions. Thousand Oaks, California.
Yes. Good morning.
Morning.
I heard on the news a few days ago that the government of Iraq and the government of Russia have a contract now whereby Russia will develop Iraqi oil fields, and the deal is worth billions of dollars. And I'm just wondering if this could have anything to do with President Bush's urgency to get into Iraq, to get to those oil fields before the Russians do. Is this possible?
Those contracts they have a lot of, under United Nations embargoes, Iraq cannot develop its oil fields and sell them. There's very strong embargoes on the sale of oil. So many oil companies, the Russians and the French, even the Americans were in line before the crisis to get access to the fields. There's no question that it's the largest depot of oil outside of Saudi Arabia in the world. That is Iraq. There's a bunch of fields there in the north as well as the south. But I think the real issue is the one that we've been talking about. Not that we're not aware of the oil, but the real issue is, of course, the strategic issue. And the Russian contract that you heard about the other day those are long-standing. The field's called Ramaya. They've been talking to each other for a dozen years about developing that field, but nothing can happen until the UN says okay. So the answer there is I don't think so. I don't think it's the prime issue.
Last call is from Lincoln. Is that Michigan?
Yes, it is.
You're on the air.
I'm calling for the comment he made on people getting killed or blacks getting killed compared to 9/11. It's absolutely ridiculous. The people that got killed is these gangbangers, dope-related, and they're telling the people in the United States they're kids. They're not. They're criminals. They should be killed. Just like we should kill the Arabs over there that's trying to kill us. It's absolutely ridiculous that he makes that statement on guns and killing blacks in this country. They're criminals.
All right, thanks. I'm a little lost on that.
I think what I said that one of the things that's interesting is that in trying to think about 9/11, trying to think about it differently, and trying to get rid of the notion, we're all so scared about it. It's so scary. 9/11 was so scary that maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe we should just be a little more hardened and realize that a lot of people die in a lot of places. And one of the things that's interesting is young black Americans get killed 3,000 a year by gunfire. People die, and this doesn't, in no way, not to suggest that it wasn't a horrific event, but countries have lived with terrorism. The British have lived 70 years with terrorism. We're not. The only point I was making is the United States of America is not at risk from terrorism. We will survive terrorism. We will beat it. And it's just getting there. If we change too many of our basic principles in this country and ameliorate too many of our constitutional rights getting there, you know, what are we? That's sort of the point I was trying to make. It had nothing to do with making a value judgment, and I really disagree with many of the children who were killed that I'm talking about are innocent kids who were shot in drive-by accidents, et cetera, and horrific crimes. They're not, the evidence that they're all gangbangers is just not clear.
Seymour Hersh's article, which has been the basis for our conversation this morning, is in the New Yorker with the cover date January 27th. It's what it looks like right here on your screen. North Korea's nuclear patron, Seymour Hersh on what the CIA knew, and you can find it on newsstands right now. Thanks for being here this morning.
Great.